Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Why are 3 council members voting no on the city's budget? What impact will a new 911 alternative program have on public safety? And how close are we to the promise of zero functional homelessness in downtown Seattle? Councilmember Andrew Lewis answers these questions and the ones you're sending in too, next on Council Edition.
Look, people want to live here, people want to build here, people want to start a business here. And we need to work as a city government to make those decisions easier.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. And here we are from District 7, Councilmember Andrew J. Lewis. Thank you very much for being with me, Councilmember Lewis.
Great to be here.
And let's jump right into it here. I want to focus on the recently passed budget for this show here. This was a very difficult process for the council after this economic forecast a few weeks ago showed some major shortfalls ahead in tax revenue. I'll get to that in a minute here. But there was this one major point of contention on the council, this decision to eliminate 80 unfilled positions on the Seattle Police Department. This prompted Councilmember Peterson to join Councilmembers Nelson and Sawant in voting no on the budget. Here's what he said earlier this week.
I cannot in good conscience endorse a final budget that I believe fails to learn from recent public policy mistakes on public safety and falls short on public safety for a third year in a row.
Full disclosure, I invited Councilmember Peterson to be on this show. He wasn't able to make it happen, but police hiring is a big issue. I always get emails about this. I know you do too. One viewer wrote this. Has there ever been discussions about using the National Guard to supplement the police since their ranks are below needed levels? Thank you very much for the message. I'm not sure if we're there at that point, but Councilmember Lewis, can you tell me how you look at this issue of police hiring and what message does abrogating 80 positions say about public safety?
Yeah, well, I was pretty clear in my vote against doing the abrogation. I voted against abrogation last year. I voted against it this year. I don't think it sends the right message until we have stood up robust and well-funded alternative response systems, which we're well on our way to doing in this budget, and we can talk about that later.
Sure.
But I didn't think that the abrogation was the right move to make. I will say I'm very critical, while I respect my colleagues, of the decision to use voting on the budget as a mechanism for protest. I don't think that it's responsible to tank the entire $1.6 billion general fund based on one area of disagreement.
Right, because you voted for that full budget and approval.
Yeah, all of us did.
Yeah.
You're supposed to.
Yeah.
The city needs a budget. We need to write paychecks. Brian, we need to give you a paycheck.
Right.
You're a city employee. We need to give paychecks.
I'm an independent contractor.
Yes, no, understood.
Yeah.
We need to give paychecks to our police and firefighters. All of that requires a budget. We need to pay debt and interest on bonds that we've borrowed as a city. And voting down a budget is a reckless and dangerous thing. It's never been done before, and it shouldn't be normalized as a protest tactic. And we've all been critical in the past when Councilmember Sawant has used voting no on the budget as a mechanism to protest. And I think we should be just as critical when other people, when they don't get their way on one or two budget items, to say, we're going to tank every single service in the city. We're going to tank parks. We're going to tank libraries. We're going to tank the police department.
Right.
And, one other thing that I'll say, Mayor Harrell praised this budget. We had a statement yesterday from Mayor Harrell praising the investments in public safety, praising the full funding of his recruitment and retention plan for Seattle Police.
And the hiring plan for SPD.
The hiring plan for SPD. Mayor Harrell came out and said this was a public safety budget. And I agree with him on that. And my colleagues who voted in the majority agree with him on that. And I don't think we can normalize this tactic where if there's one thing you don't like in the budget, you vote it down. I think that leads to a very dangerous Washington, D.C. level of brinkmanship in how we do politics in this city. And it's unprecedented. So, I didn't get my way on the abrogation. I voted with Councilmember Peterson and Councilmember Nelson against the abrogation.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we need a budget. We need to pay our bills.
Right.
So I don't think it's a valid protest tactic to say we're going to tank the whole budget if we don't get our way on one thing.
Jumping on that abrogation piece just for a second, though, if the police department looks like it's going to hire a net of maybe 30 officers next year is what it looks like here, abrogating these positions that they're not going to fill when there's 200 some odd that Mayor Harrell put in the budget there initially there, it would seem to make sense to take those back and then ask the SPD to ask for them later on down the line. I think is the logic that the rest of the council was working with here.
Well, see, my preference would have been, Brian, that we keep the position authority, but if there's surplus money, we'd be flexible in working with Mayor Harrell to move the money. And that's actually what we did in this budget, and that was what Mayor Harrell proposed, and I thought that was the right course.
Okay.
Doing the permanent abrogation, it just didn't sit right with me right now, given the public safety situation that we're seeing. But you know, that wasn't what carried the day with my colleagues, and this is the budget we have. I would say, again, you know, myself, Mayor Harrell, we support this final budget. It gives us the tools we need to start turning the corner, and we're seeing signs of that in parts of the city and downtown and other places where we are making a lot of progress with our partnership as a council and a mayor on these problems, and this budget is going to help us with that effort.
Got it. I want to talk about another important issue with police. So the council adopted Mayor Harrell's plan to move parking enforcement officers back to the SPD. They've been housed in the Seattle Department of Transportation for the past year. That hasn't worked out all that well. The eventual home for these officers may not be with the SPD, but this is a move that could save about $5 million in administrative costs, according to the mayor's office here. I know a lot of council members wanted to keep these PEOs in the Department of Transportation. How did you come to this agreement here?
Well, really, for me, what it came down to was the ability to save some money and programmatically expand some other public safety opportunities by doing that move.
Okay.
And that was really, you know, it was not worth $5 million a year to keep them in SDOT doing the exact same thing, the exact same job. The interaction with the public is not going to change based on this decision. But we got $5 million additional dollars in the budget to make sure that we can expand the law enforcement assisted diversion, now known as Let Everyone Advance with Dignity.
Yeah.
We got money to invest in public safety efforts downtown on 3rd Avenue, money that we would not have had if we had insisted on keeping the parking officers in SDOT. So that's what it really came down to, is just the practicality of what can I do to maximize the public safety benefit for the people of District 7? And it was moving them back to SPD. There's going to be no difference in the service you're going to get from parking enforcement, but that move gives us the opportunity to expand additional public safety programming that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And that's what it was for me.
The eventual home and the communications center, I know there's been some talk about that too.
Yes, I mean, I do still want to move parking enforcement ultimately to a role where the full civilian impact can be realized.
Yeah.
You know, this is a longer story. This would be a whole thing in and of itself.
You're right.
But you know, Councilmember Herbold and I really wanted to move them to the CSCC back in the day because we wanted to also expand their role. We didn't want them just to do parking enforcement, but to really follow up on some recommendations from their union, SPIOG, the Parking Enforcement Guild, where they wanted to expand their role to you know, taking reports on car theft, to you know, doing a bigger amount of the traffic direction. You know, these are things they wanted to take on in a role that could be expanded and built up as civilian enforcement officers. And that role was never really embraced by the previous Durkin administration. I think there's an opening with Mayor Harrell to do something similar. Mayor Harrell has talked about creating a new civilian public safety department, for example. Whether that's something where the CSCC serves as the nucleus for that new project, or whether it's a completely additional department, we have yet to see. But my hope is that the parking enforcement officers could find a role there, and that their role could be expanded to being more of a civilian enforcement officer with broader mandate than just traffic enforcement. And you know, being in SDOT, it was basically, you know, as the name implies, right, Department of Transportation, your role is going to stay doing the parking enforcement. You know, I don't want to speak for all my colleagues, but you know, Councilmember Herbold and I have really been advocates of this position that these civilian officers could take on a much bigger role, and it could free up police officer time to focus on things only they can do and that they need to be doing.
Let me talk about another issue with public safety that you've been working on for some time here to provide an alternative to 911, a response that would involve a mental health worker and a police officer potentially. There's money in the budget for this, a dual dispatch type of program here. I want to know when we're going to see it launched, what it'll look like, and what impact you think it's going to have.
So I'm more optimistic on this than I've ever been in the last couple of years, and as you know, Brian, this has been
working on this a while.
This has been a very big priority of mine since at least June of 2020, probably a little bit earlier than that. But I think this is really the center of gravity of what community has really been demanding. ever since we started really reevaluating how do we do public safety in the city of Seattle has been there's this big category of calls that don't require a gun and badge response, and we can diversify our response based on what other jurisdictions are doing to make sure that police are going to things only they can respond to. We want police focusing on burglaries. We want police focusing on robberies. We want police focusing on things that are criminal violations in the city that they need to respond to and where their response is necessary and appropriate. But there's all these other things related to extreme poverty, related to mental health, substance addiction, where other cities have really shown us that alternative responses can be incredibly effective and can save officer time so that they can focus more on these things that are really affecting our quality of life. You know, I'm talking to business districts all the time that are suffering from spates of burglaries, you know, at like 3 to 6 in the morning. And it'd be great to have more officer emphasis in business districts to be able to do that because we've freed up response time and capacity by adding these alternative responses for things they don't need to do. So in terms of the process we set up, we're going to have a pilot that we've worked out with the Herald administration to do a dual dispatch response. Let me just briefly break down what that means. So dual dispatch means that there'd be this completely independent civilian team. In other cities, typically this involves a mental health clinician and then maybe like a social worker or like an EMT. But this team, it's typically 2 members with a van or maybe an SUV that has some equipment in it. They can respond dually with the police. So the police are in their own separate vehicle. 911 call comes in, and the dispatcher, the 911 dispatcher can say, okay, I'm going to dispatch this low acuity public health team, and I'm going to dispatch the police. Both separately at the same time. But if the social worker team gets there first and it's something that they can handle, they would be in a position to be able to screen SPD off the call, right? Or they'd be able to say, you know, we got here, it's not dangerous, we can handle it, we're trained to handle it, we can, you know, SPD, you can screen off. So it can save that officer car time because then they can screen off the call and they can be redirected to a call only they can do. That is the concept of what we're trying to do here with a dual dispatch. It is different from co-response, which is the model that's like our crisis intervention team, which we're still going to have and which is still really, really, really important. But that is the system where you have an officer and a social worker in the same car. And we're still going to have that because there's certain circumstances where that is the appropriate response. But there's these other things where this public health team really can do this on its own. So I just wanted to break down those differences. So we will have co-response and dual response and police response in our portfolio in 2023. In terms of moving forward, you know, we passed the budget, and this is going to go forward now to be implemented by the Herald administration. We have something that I know you've discussed before called a term sheet with the Herald administration, where we are working in close partnership with a dual work team of council and executive staff. And I'm hoping that now that the budget's done, we're going to have a better sense on what that timeline is in the coming weeks. So we don't know what the timeline is. We had to fund it first. Now that we've done that, the term sheet can move forward to say, all right, let's get the rubber on the road, literally, and like let's get this team out there. But look, Brian, I'll just say we have lots of great national examples to draw inspiration from. This is being done in Denver. It's being done in Albuquerque. It's being done in Fort Worth, Eugene. In Denver, it's correlated to a 34% reduction of crime in the downtown area of Denver. So this really can be a game changer once it's on the road, and I'm hoping it will be. And I believe the Herald administration believes the same thing as the council, as manifested in the term sheet. And really their support for this concept in the budget and baking it into their initial budget that we just approved.
Thank you for breaking all those pieces down. I wanted to move on to human services with you if I could. This budget largely reflects what Mayor Harrell originally proposed, but the council did push back on his plan to reduce a cost of inflation raise for human services workers. He wanted to spread it out over a couple years. The council says, let's do it now, wants to uphold those raises for people who really are the frontline workers in the crisis of homelessness. Let me know what into this decision and why this was important.
Well, public safety is broader than badges and guns, and we've been discussing that on this show and in public. And the police have a critical and indispensable role, and it was really important in this budget that we support the police, that we fully fund the hiring and retention plan. I would argue it was just as important that we make sure that we focused on the retention and recruitment challenges our service providers are experiencing. There's a lot of work that folks on the streets of Seattle are doing to work on people who are in a cycle of public health challenge that is resulting in them breaking the social contract and you creating public disorder. And the teams that have been making really big differences on that, lead, co-lead, Downtown Emergency Service Center, when you go down the list, Catholic Community Services, these folks are having a very difficult time recruiting and retaining people to do incredibly challenging work in a really tough economic environment.
Right.
And with inflation going way up, it's just eating at the limited wages and benefits that we've historically rewarded those positions with. So I frankly don't think what we did was enough. I think what we did was the bare minimum. I am incredibly proud that we were able to do it in a tough budget environment, but I can't imagine what it would have done to the social service end of our public safety work if we had only given the folks doing that work like a 4% increase instead of a true inflationary increase. I think it would have fallen off a cliff. And I think that we truly worked to avert disaster by fully funding the commitment that we made in ordinance. The previous council, I was not on the council when that ordinance passed, but by fully honoring that commitment, we're really getting stability in a critical segment of our social service and public safety work. And we need to build on that by continuing to elevate the standards, the benefits, the pay that the people in that work get. We need to treat them like the first responders they are. and the city will be safer for it.
Yeah. Let me keep going down this human services path with you, because you and I had a really good conversation about the King County Regional Homelessness Authority a few weeks ago, part of which I used on our City Inside Out program. There are a few points you made that I couldn't get into that show, and I wanted to follow up on this. Specifically, this plan from the KCRHA to reach functional zero homelessness in downtown Seattle sometime in 2023. Mark Dones, the CEO, says it's going to happen. Do you agree? Downtown in your district? Let's talk about it.
I feel more optimistic about it than I have in the past. Let me put it this way, I'll say this. Sorry, Mark, I'll say this here. I was a little skeptical that we would be able to achieve functional zero in the time frame that the KCRHA put out. I am optimistic that we're getting closer than ever before to realizing that, based on the energy and the organization that has gone into Partnership for Zero. And I can just break it down real briefly here, but essentially the groundwork that's been being laid this year is the King County Regional Homelessness Authority has hired up a bunch of system advocates who have been building a by name list of people experiencing homelessness who are in and around the downtown core.
Those advocates have lived experience too as being homeless. Yeah.
Yes, and have been doing this work in some cases for many years.
Right.
They're very experienced and diligent people. And they've been generating this by name list, and at the same time, they've also been building a list of potential housing referrals and housing units.
They're working with landlords on this
stuff.
Yeah,
and working with landlords. So now they're at the point where everything is kind of coming together, where they're matching the by name list to these housing referrals. And they're all coordinating it through a very, very efficient command center where all these providers and system advocates are case conferencing. They're in the same room, and they're matchmaking this by name list to these housing referrals. It's also important to define functional zero.
Yeah.
And this is a term, if we remember back to the partnerships that we've done with Third Door Coalition, which is an alliance of service providers and business owners. Functional zero was something they talked about a lot because, look, unfortunately, I don't think in the near future we're going to completely be a society without homelessness. But you can reach functional zero in the sense that you can make homelessness rare, brief, and temporary. So, we're probably still going to have a situation going into February of next year, January of next year, where there are going to be people presenting as experiencing homelessness downtown. But we're going to have a system that can help get that person on a by name list, get them access to case conference resources, get them referrals to housing, so that we don't have a situation like we have had where you have chronic parts of downtown that become massive encampments or become massive concentrations of poverty and disorder because we don't have our act together to be able to give people something better as an offer. And KCRHA has really shown now we have this very the beginnings of what could be a very efficient system to first identify folks based on where they're at and what their needs are, case conference through all of our resources, because there's big myriad of resources. And the KCRHA actually, just as a little plug, recently put out a database of all those resources, which
it's online,
is really, really helpful, and anyone in the public can look at it. But you case conference all of that together, and you match it to the housing. And we've never really had something that efficient before, and that can really be a game changer, and we're already seeing the early signs that it will be. And that's not just me saying that, right? I mean, that's, We Are In, which is a consortium of businesses that have been supporting this, and community leaders. It's the Downtown Seattle Association. It's the Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce. We're bought in on this regional approach. And actually, one other plug, our budget makes a bigger investment than ever in the success of that system. And that is something that we really need to do as people committed to a regional solution. It really comes into, are we putting our money behind the theory of change we want to see? And that's what we are doing as a council in partnership with the business community, with service providers, and with the King County government.
Can I touch on another issue? Because the council also made an investment in local schools following the shooting death of a student at Ingram High School a few weeks ago. Hundreds of students, as you know, came to City Hall, protested here against gun violence, asked for more funding for mental health counselors. The council made an investment towards this goal of $4 million, a quarter of that going to Ingram directly. The budget chair called this a down payment, I believe, and this is an issue here. The city can help in some ways, but this is a role for the state really to jump in as well. Can you talk about this investment, maybe some of the limitations involved with it too? This is a huge story for our area.
Look, we did it because we couldn't wait. And I give great credit to Councilmember Mosqueda, great credit to Council President Juarez, who had this horrible tragedy occur in her district, and who really came at the end of the budget cycle to say, we need to put our money where our values are, and this school system needs this proper support for young people who are troubled, who might use guns as a method of resolving arguments, or we've increasingly seen during COVID young people committing suicide with guns. And the leadership from Councilmember Mosqueda and Council President Juarez in getting that in the budget was something I was very proud to support, and I really appreciate both of them as colleagues. To your point, Brian, the state really does need to step up on this. Healthcare is a state issue. Behavioral mental health care is definitely a state issue. I think this is one of the biggest deficiencies that we've seen in state government. We're seeing it dramatized right now by King County, rightfully, suing the state for negligence in providing ample behavioral mental health care in the King County Jail, which has seen an unprecedented number of suicides and mental health crisis during the COVID era, and this was reported in the Seattle Times yesterday.
Right.
And the state, they're suing the state to perform, to say, you are not living up to your obligations to provide health care to people that are in the King County Jail. You can apply that to the schools. The city of Seattle has been more generous than any other government in stepping into a place where we don't have a charter responsibility, but we have a moral responsibility to provide this level of care. The last thing that I'll say on this is I'm very excited about the work that King County is doing, and that I'm going to be engaging more with in the coming months through my role in the Regional Policy Committee around the crisis intervention centers.
Right.
And I know you talked about this recently on your podcast, but King County right now has something like 16 crisis mental health beds for a county of several million people. It's completely unacceptable. And this new proposal from King County that is going to create 5 crisis intervention centers. One is going to be completely dedicated to young people and to the unique issues that present for the mental health challenges that young people are experiencing in this really difficult time. That is going to be a game changer, and it's something that I look forward to supporting on the Regional Policy Committee and moving it forward. Huge props and credit to Councilmember Zahalai. Huge props and credit to Executive Constantine on taking this on as an issue. And I think that's the next big step. Obviously in the state legislature, we're going to need to push for comprehensive behavioral mental health care. But these wellness centers are going to make a big difference too, and I'm looking forward to making sure that service is synced up with our schools.
Got it. I want to make sure that I touch on one issue that's a big one here. I've got a couple minutes to do it with you here. The big overall question on the budget, use of the Jumpstart payroll tax here. This fund has performed above expectations, and much of the budget shortfall the city's experiencing now, a big drop in real estate excise tax, a part of that has been patched up up with Jumpstart. And I say patched up because I don't think the council found any more permanent solutions to this going forward. Let's talk about this. Another revenue shortage is going to be there the next time the next budget rolls around. What's that longer term solution there? I've got about a minute and a half.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things. First, we do have this revenue task force, and we're going to be having a community conversation about what it might look like to pursue additional progressive revenue to fill those gaps in the long term. The second thing that I would put out there is we really have a lot of targeted investments in this budget cycle that are focused on downtown revitalization. Downtown produces over 50% of our general fund tax receipts. And getting downtown really humming again hopefully will make a difference on our forecast. We are still a city that I think that we have the second most cranes of any West Coast city right now. And construction is one of the big feeders of our general fund. Look, people want to live here, people want to build here, people want to start a business here. And we need to work as a city government to make those decisions easier, and that's going to have an impact on our general fund. So I don't think it's just going to be the progressive revenue work, although we need to do that, and that's going to be part of it. Another part of it is, let's get that real estate excise tax up by making this a better place for people to come and buy property. Let's get that sales tax up by reinvigorating our retail core so that people are coming downtown and patronizing those businesses again. Let's get that property tax up by building new construction, which increases our property tax base. So I think part of it is let's increase the base of the modes that we have while we're also looking at progressive taxation. And that's what I'm looking forward to in 2023.
Thank you. I have one final question here. The city is about to announce some big improvements coming to Memorial Stadium there on the Seattle Center campus. You're a graduate of the Center School right there on that campus, and I wanted to know your thoughts about some major changes, it sounds like, coming to your old stomping grounds.
Yeah, well, the Seattle Center over the course of the last 15 years, and for part of that period I had a front row seat going to school on that campus, has really transformed in an incredibly positive way. I mean, it's the cultural center of our city. The modern history of our city is linked back to the World's Fair. And all of the kind of rough edges have been polished, right? The Northwest rooms, which were falling apart, now it's the home of the Vera Project, Seattle International Film Festival, KEXP.
Yep.
Key Arena, which was sort of missionless, now the home of a new NHL team, hopefully soon an NBA team, and this great modern subterranean arena and climate pledge. The only rough patch, the sore thumb of that campus, is Memorial Stadium. It's crumbling, it's falling apart, it's fenced in, it's a blight. We are going to be focusing on a transformative partnership with the Seattle Public Schools that we have funded in this budget to overhaul, to rebuild that stadium, and hopefully have it be here in time for the World Cup when we are hosting it in a couple years. And it's going to really open up the campus. It's going to be a beautiful amenity for the community. And I'm really looking forward to it.
USA, USA, I can hear it from here.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Lewis, for joining me. That's all the time we have on Council Edition. We'll see you next time.